Hi guys, this is Clem.
This is Kevin.
A couple of you have asked for a podcast between myself and Kevin talking about various things. Neither of us are experienced podcasters. This is the first for both of us, so purely experimental, and we decided we'd pick something topical to talk about, situation with Iran. And if we like the recording, we'll upload it, and you guys can see what you think. Good, bad, indifferent. You can let us know. And yeah, so here goes. Kevin, let's talk about the Iran thing. Some initial views from you, since what's going on?
On the surface, it doesn't seem like Trump has a really good option. Um, what he would want, typically, he's not, he's neither a gambler nor a competitor. He's from the world of professional wrestling. And so the results are always negotiated before, and then there's a performance, and then he declares victory. You saw that in Venezuela for sure. And so it doesn't, I can't imagine that anything's been pre negotiated in this situation, although we'll see. And so then on the second level, he needs something fast. He can go in, I mean, he could easily lob a few tomahawks on Tehran. Iran can attack Tel Aviv a few times and then somehow declare victory from that. I don't know. We have this report that the Saudis, which I'm skeptical about, but anyway, maybe it's not even false. They said that if Trump backs off now, it will only empower the regime. I mean, the statement's there to make it seem like the Saudis are on the American side, but it's actually probably a true statement. I mean, if you think about it, if Trump heads back to, it takes all the ships back to Virginia, I mean, yeah, maybe that would help them. But on the other hand, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. A kind of a weak strike would also empower the regime. They, especially domestically, they would have stood up to America and Israel, the combined forces, and still standing strong. So what I'm leaning towards is that it looks like Trump is going to maybe fall into something a long term issue, and surely if we look at it geopolitically from a high point of view, we have this famous statement by Brzezinski about the most dangerous alliance against America would be China, Russia, and Iran. And Iran's definitely the weakest link of that chain, and the whole chain, the multipolar world is still kind of evolving and forming. It's not really a true alliance. And so it seems like now's the time, before they've really cemented the alliance, to go after Iran. But is it going to be a quick in and out? We bomb a few things, we declare victory, we go home. Um, it's hard to see that. What we have here is like how solid is the regime? Can they take a sustained or even a short bombing? I would think they can. And so this is I just don't understand exactly. It doesn't fit into Trump's persona, like this taking a big gamble where he could look really bad if, especially if there's a lot of casualties or some ships get sunk or Israel gets pummeled. Uh, so this is I'm just a little confused, and a lot of people are like, how is this going to play out?
So I was just wondering. Uh, One of his objectives apparently is the Iranian nuclear program. Um, Certainly publicly stated objective, and which calls into question the success of the bombing that they did last year on the various facilities. And there were different assessments, you'll recall, but the Trump administration was quite certain they had materially damaged those facilities. This very set of events that seems to be unfolding now seems to indicate that, in fact, that wasn't the case. And at a certain level, perhaps the regime has emerged stronger from that situation. They lobbed a lot of missiles at Israel. The Israelis tried to play down the damage, but it's quite clear that there was concern about it, because we know that one of his other objectives is to limit the range of Iranian missiles. A clear indicator that the Israelis took some pain from that. And of course, the combination of the two potential, I personally am of the view that they've probably quietly crossed the nuclear threshold, that they probably have a couple of relatively crude nuclear devices, Hiroshima type things, that it's a real concern. But possibly what has happened as a result of that strike is that the regime has actually emerged stronger. You'll recollect that at the time, certainly in the media, we saw what appeared to be a great deal of Iranian public solidarity behind the state at the time of the war, and that appeared to strengthen the regime rather than achieve what had appeared to be one of the objectives of Israel and the US, which was to weaken the regime and see if they could bring about some sort of a revolution on the streets. Even before that set of events, you'll recollect that Netanyahu addressed the Iranian people at one stage and said, can't remember the exact words, but words to the effect of the hour of your liberation is nigh. So it's clear that they've been trying to weaken the regime, and they seem not to have succeeded. And this latest series of protests on the street may have been organic. I can't really form a clear view of that, but certainly we saw external support from Israel and US, and I have no doubt that there were state agents, Western state agents from the US or Israel on the ground there playing a role. So you're quite right that I think if it's true that the Saudis said that, I think it's quite correct that if you simply turn the fleet around and sail home, that the Iranian state emerges stronger. I was quite interested, though, in your point about the Russia, China, Iran triangle, which I think is quite obvious that Iran is the weakest link. But somebody made the point that if they can, in a Venezuela type playbook, which we'll come to in a moment, if they can uh, change the state, and earlier in our discussion before we started recording, you referred to the idea that they want a more moderate set of mullahs in power. It also could choke the Chinese oil supply. If they can obtain a degree of control over the Iranian state, similar to what they've done with Venezuela, China gets, Iran exports about 90% of its oil to China, and at quite a deep discount to normal market prices. So that's of enormous benefit to the Chinese, and that if they could obtain control of that and stop that supply, it would deprive the Chinese of certain advantages. So yeah, I think there's a lot going on, probably things at various different levels. But let's would you unpack for us your thoughts around the Venezuela playbook, which the New York Times and various have reported that that's in the back of Trump's head, that it's one of the options he's thinking about, actually putting some special forces, SEAL type operation in to do a very targeted strike, similar to Venezuela. Obviously, we can't know exactly what it'll look like, but that he's got some fear about it turning out the way Jimmy Carter's Operation Eagle Claw turned out. So a whole lot of helicopters lying around the desert, which and Trump has been quite disparaging about that in the past. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, it's funny because in professional life, you always want to repeat a successful project. So, what did we do on the last project that worked? We do that all the time. And so, you've put two example. The other side of that is you don't want to repeat a failed project. And so, the Jimmy Carter attack in '79 is obviously a catastrophe. Whereas the Venezuela project is a very limited, pre-planned project, seems to have succeeded for Trump. And so, to me, I see two models now, and these are two recent models, and maybe, and so I believe from the U.S. point of view, they would like to be able to pull something like that off to put some moderate mullahs into power. Uh, and if you think about it, and so the other model then is the Syrian model, where you start a civil war that goes on for 10 years, and then you end up with moderate Muslims. Because if you look at Syria, uh, in the end, it wasn't those kind of like democratic, secular, pro-Western Syrians that got placed into power. It was an Al Qaeda, a former Al Qaeda guy. And in Venezuela, it wasn't like the Nobel Prize winning liberal, libertarian, pro-Western. It was a communist. It was a communist number two who was raised to communist number one. I'm exaggerating a little, obviously, just to show that it wasn't really an ideological thing. And so and this is where I see there's a lot of like pro-Western Iranian expats who are really, I mean, you can understand. Obviously, I haven't had to live under that regime, and you know, I can totally understand, feel their pain. But on the other hand, is this really the way to go? Because from the Americans' point of view, they just want like a satrap, someone to govern for them. Uh, and for them, how far is it really just going to be like a governor controlled by America? Or, I mean, even in Venezuela, it's kind of ambiguous right now where that's all going. And so I can see those two models where there's a decapitation strike. Remember, for some reason, when America goes to war, it's always this morality tale about like an evil head, Saddam Hussein, or there's always like this evil one that has to be taken out. Whereas there, they did overturn the entire regime, and that's kind of like the other bad example too. So it's like, no, we don't want to do that. We just want a quick decapitation. I just can't see that they have the power unless they have some insiders that they are very confident about who are encouraging them, that we can't know obviously about that. The other option is a long civil war where the U.S. strikes allow some proxy forces to grab part of Iran and start the process of civil war, like in Syria, and then grind them down. You know, that seems like a long shot. That seems more that kind of the Israeli playbook than the American. And so, in terms of nuclear, to me, Iran is kind of in a dangerous no man's land because they've refined their uranium up to above 60%, which is really close to weapons grade. From 60 to 90%, which is weapons grade, is a very easy leap. It's you're just there basically. And yet, so they have the danger of nuclear weapons, but they don't have the protection of nuclear weapons. If it's true they haven't developed them, it seems hard to believe that they wouldn't have. I know a lot of people say, "Oh, these dumb boomers, they don't know, they don't understand the world. They're idealistic. They don't, and so I would tend to think they also have nuclear weapons. And so one idea in the back of my head is like, is this all choreographed to allow that Iran becomes a nuclear power? That they're forced into this and they test a device? I mean, I don't know. You know, are they threatening Trump that okay, we're going to test a device and humiliate you because it'll be on your watch that we became nuclear? Obviously, the attack, when was that, last June, was more show than anything. Certainly, the highly refined uranium wasn't touched. I think Israel reported that they have 400 kilograms of highly refined uranium floating around. Obviously, these are sensitive subjects, so we don't know exactly, but that seems quite realistic, actually, that they would. And so there are solutions. This is the thing. There are solutions on the nuclear question. There, with Russia. Iran has offered to send their highly enriched uranium to Russia. They claim they don't want to become a nuclear power, which could be understandable in the Middle East. And so they just want the protection. And maybe in such a deal, Russia puts them under their nuclear umbrella. On the ballistic missiles, Iran has an impressive ballistic missile program, hypersonic. They're very proud of it, and so I don't. There's no compromise there. They're not gonna. There's nothing there. The U.S. would have to destroy, physically destroy and that's they're buried deep underground. So that would be a very serious campaign. I mean, if we look at these bombing campaigns, if we look at like Russia's been bombing Ukraine for 4 years now, and they're not in great shape, but they're still out there. And so I mean, we're talking conventional, and so so yeah. Obviously, that's kind of a dream scenario to get some moderate mullahs in there. That would be, but from idea to practice, how does that actually happen? I don't know. Um,
So that's it. If you think about the nuclear program, I've previously pointed out that the view is that they never really managed to damage the Isfahan facility, which, as I've also pointed out, the Chinese engineers were involved with that apparently, at in part at some stage. And after the B2 bombing campaign, the IAEA, one of the senior officials, said that the highly enriched uranium, the 400 or 450 kilos, apparently it's in terms of volume, it's not very much. You can move it in the back of a small vehicle. That had
yeah.
disappeared from view, and in that
Hmm.
sense, the situation had been exacerbated. They'd solved nothing. That actually made the problem potentially worse because nobody knows where it went. And the view then from various experts was that that could quickly be enriched,
Yes.
and to create a Hiroshima gun type of nuke would be a matter of no particular difficulty. Technically,
Hmm.
it could be done relatively quickly and relatively easily. Now, whether they've done that, nobody knows. We can only speculate. I pointed out elsewhere that the South Africans took about 5 years from the decision to develop nukes to the day they had working nukes was about 5 years. They did it in about 5 years. The Iranians have been at their project for about 40 years. So it would be really surprising if they could put something together reasonably quickly, although the South Africans didn't have the challenges that the Iranians have had with strikes by Israel and the US and assassinations
Hmm.
and so
Hmm.
forth. But if the concern is about the nuclear program, and there are limits to how that can be solved. It's clear that the bombing campaign didn't solve the problem in terms of the facilities, which is why there's discussion about putting in special strike forces to finally destroy the facilities. Clearly, the message is they're too deep and too hardened to be destroyed by conventional airstrikes. The second is to obtain some degree of cooperation from the current state, which you can see Trump trying to do on social media, making demands and so forth. But I read this morning in the New York Times that the Iranians have just said they're not going to negotiate under threat. Whether that's just face saving, I don't know. And the third option is, of course, to change the leadership of the Iranian state to somebody who's more compliant and will play along. So those seem to be the options at the moment. And except for the military option of putting people on the ground, we've seen the other two playing out in different ways. We can see the pressure on the Iranian state, the demand, and we can see the attempts to try to bring about regime change through protests on the street. But I don't see another option really for the West to solve this problem, and perhaps you're just going to end up with a Middle Eastern equivalent of North Korea ultimately, and it's an unsolvable problem. And then they couldn't solve the North Korean problem, and now it's just accepted, and everybody kind of lives with it. So yeah, I think that
Yeah. We,
yeah.
yeah. To me, the compromise for just the nuclear issue, I could easily see a compromise, and it would be Russia. Russia would be the key node of it. That Russia would take kind of responsibility for that enriched uranium. The problem, like hunting it down, I mean, like you said, the 400 kilograms is relatively small. How, how are you going to find that? You could get some, you could destroy some of their facilities, but they could have others that are hidden. You never really know whether you've gotten everything. And so, and as you say, if they have like 10 bombs already, then, you're chasing your tail. There's really not anything you can do. To me, Trump needs a political victory. And so, the only thing I could see making sense is on this issue that there's some kind of negotiation with Russia that kind of ends up with a compromise. Short of that, a military solution to kind of like destroy the nuclear program, short of with using conventional weapons or even special forces. I don't know. That's unless they have. I mean, Israel, they're excellent spies, and so maybe they know where it is. That could be something. And so, but typically, that's going to be a very difficult job for conventional military to solve, tracking down this small, this small thing. They can do symbolic victories. They can blow up or they can invade and blow up one of their facilities and call it like again like last June. Call it victory. Trump's great at declaring victory. There's no question about that. But is it a real victory? And I don't think Israel went along last time with his declaring victory when and it was obvious they knew it wasn't. But since it's their security at risk here, I don't think they're going to be so keen to play along again if he does kind of like a fake victory thing.
So it's possible, I suppose, that a deal could be done with the Russians and the Iranians together. You said earlier the Iranians have indicated a degree of willingness to do that. Putin is certainly on record um, in archival documents, some of which have been released recently, going back many years, as saying that he wasn't in favor of Iran becoming a nuclear power, that they were prepared to cooperate with the US um, to try to persuade the Iranians not to go down that road. So possibly some sort of a grand bargain. It's possible it could
Hmm.
either simply be narrow in terms of Russia has an interest in preventing Iran from becoming a nuclear state, and there's a narrow field of cooperation between the US and Russia on this, or it could potentially form part of a bigger deal between the US and Russia in terms of relating also in some way, perhaps not so explicitly, but in the background, to the deal around Ukraine and trying to get that sorted out and trying to reach a resolution around that. Perhaps there would be some trade off because the Iran nuclear issue is a very important one to the US, very important to Israel, because important to Israel, also important to the US. And so perhaps, we don't know, we can never know, but perhaps there's some background discussion going on around that. I think the US concession around the Russians taking possession of Donbass, very much against the Ukrainian wishes, but that appears to be part of what they call the Alaska or Anchorage formula. Perhaps there's a relationship between all this in the background that's simply not visible to us. But parking that for a moment, let's assume that the US somehow manages to achieve a compliant or a more compliant Iranian state. Where does that leave Russia and China, and how do they feel about that change in the one point of the triangle? How do you see that?
It's an interesting question. Recently, just in the past few days, there's been a deal between Russia, India, and the UAE in terms of currencies that they can trade with each other outside of the dollar. And so maybe maybe in the Gulf, the UAE, who are also showing hostility towards Saudi Arabia. There's tension there, whether it's real tension or fake tension, hard to say. But if if Iran goes fully into the American camp and cuts off China from its oil, I mean, Russia benefits. It pushes Russia and China together. They become almost twins, like totally dependent on each other. Um, and it seems like the U.S.'s number one policy goal is to split Russia and China. Um, and the secondary goal would be to split off Iran. You maybe have to do one step at a time. And so it's a question of sequencing. Um, if they can get, I mean, would Iran then even then pull out of BRICS? It's hard to see that they would even have the interest. Even if you had the moderate mullah, that means that it's not going to be a full-on American puppet. So Iran, from their point of view, they want to become like a Shiite UAE, like a rich, glittering Persian Gulf nation. They look across the Gulf and they see Saudi Arabia and UAE. They're like, why can't we be like that? And so, that is like one motive to kind of fold into the whole Western kind of mode of being. But on the other hand, you have China, who's the future economic power, and so it's hard to see. It would almost take like the Civil War, the long grind, and serious regime change, I think, to get Iran fully into the Western fold. I think a quick decapitation would just maybe cut the outward hostility. Maybe you could also, there's the proxy question. And so another demand has been to stop supporting the Yemen, Hezbollah. It's questionable how much they really support Hamas. And so maybe there could be some compromise on that from say the new moderate mullah. Um, so they can make if there is that, they make the deal with Russia. Then if the nuclear deal is with Russia, then already they're tied. That ties them in with the BRICS, and so it's hard. It seems like in order to get them fully out of the whole BRICS, China, Russia alliance, it's going to take a major kind of revolution in power, a totally new view in Tehran, which would tend to me to imply like the expats, kind of like the pro-Western expats come to power, which I just don't see happening. That's
Yeah, that's good. It strikes me that these things are a little bit like a hydra. If you cut off the one head,
yes,
you find there's another person who replaces him, who's not necessarily any more moderate, maybe, but not necessarily. And in fact, I Ronan Bergman in his book, one of his books, makes the point that at some stage the Israelis stopped assassinations because they concluded that you couldn't predict whether the replacement would be better or worse, or you couldn't always predict whether the
exactly.
replacement would be better or worse, and that you could end up in a situation which is more difficult to manage than the one you're trying to manage.
Hmm.
But I think certainly the Israelis view and understandably view the nuclear issue as existential, and so I think we're just going to sit and watch this thing play out. And I'm going to be very interested to see what Trump does. It might play out in a couple of days, but also it could take weeks. The Venezuelan thing sort of built up over weeks, and then suddenly something happens. So I don't know what will happen here, but very interesting to
That's
watch it.
That's a good point about Venezuela because typically with Trump, you would think it would happen well, like on a Friday or Saturday after the close of the markets, if he's counting on something very short and sharp. And almost always at night it would start. So now it's daytime in the Persian Gulf. So it doesn't. It seems like we're still a couple days, maybe a week away. But you're right. that the Venezuela model where the pressure slowly built up, and so there are these negotiations in Abu Dhabi about Ukraine, but I guess those are just Russia and Ukraine. But what I was going to say is Steve Witkoff is in charge of the Israel dossier and the Ukraine dossier, and so when he and Jared go and talk to Putin, who's to say they're talking? They're not talking about a larger. They're not combining the Iranian dossier with the what in their meetings and talking about possible solutions. It's possible. What on Ukraine? That's another subject, but I think the Americans there are really showing an urgency to get it over with, whereas Russia is like no urgency at all because you know they're not dominating, but they're winning slowly, and so you know. What interested me also was this energy, the strike on it, or the stopping on of the energy strikes. I wonder, would Putin really do that when and not take Iran and say, "Look, man, you want me to stop, not strike Ukraine? I don't want you to strike Iran." So you could see how these two could get blended together. Actually, it's an interest because America has no leverage on Ukraine really in that war, and so maybe it's a long shot. Maybe this is their way of kind of grabbing a little bit of leverage, saying, "Okay, we won't strike Iran." I don't know. I'm speculating,
So
but go
yeah, so
ahead.
I think the undertaking by Putin to suspend strikes on Ukraine for a week is really symbolic and meaningless because you can't
Hmm.
repair the electrical infrastructure in a meaningful way in a week and change people's lives to return it to something normal. And then after a week, the strikes resume. It's not as though anybody's going to be moving out of a heating tent back into their apartment. So I don't think it's anything more than symbolic. It makes Trump look good. It gives Putin something to give Trump to look good with. The one thing about the Iran equation is that I would imagine that the Americans also want to be careful of the effect on the oil market and the oil price and what could result from that. So there's a degree of balance there, and there's got to be a set of calculations in the background going on about what's the effect and what happens. Because I think I would imagine that the effect of shutting of an attack on Iran could have a significant effect. There's the question of their ability to close the Persian Gulf, whether they'll
Hmm.
do so, whether it can be cleaned up and whether it can be prevented. A lot of different views around that. Some very good articles have been written. So that's got to be sitting somewhere in the background of the calculus as well, because Trump, of course, doesn't want oil prices to go off the charts.
And that hints towards a very short and sharp strike as opposed to a long war of attrition, because obviously they would be able to shut down the Straits of Hormuz eventually. And that would spike oil prices. You have to think Trump has the 2026 midterms apparently coming, and he has so many. He has domestic struggles. He has hemispheric. He's threatening Cuba. He's Venezuela. It's not really sure whether it's under control or not. Now he has these global things. He has a lot of he's juggling a lot of balls right now, and so again, it seems to lean towards something short. And if you're Iran, Russia, China, you want something, you want to tie him down in the Persian Gulf. Uh, the oil pricing is going up. Is that I suppose that would help Russia? No, and so yeah, it's this is why so many people are confused about he has it seems like a very small window, and what we don't know is what their connections within the regime, what they have there on the ground. Remember the 12-day war? They had a lot of people on the ground with drones and attacking the air defenses. They thought they were really going to topple the regime at that. It was fairly close, I think, actually. And so now with these demonstrations, a lot of their assets apparently got rolled up because of the Starlink, or apparently the regime were able to capture a lot of these people. And so that's what we don't know, what they have on the ground, the U.S. and Israel there as the first step in these chain of events. I mean, the U.S. and Israel both are great at these kind of special ops, these kind of short little operations. So we it's that's what they're good at, and so we're going to have to see. um,
So it raises. I mean, it raises the question of who are they really dealing with in the background? You remember when the Syrian thing happened, that was when we sort of discovered that they'd been talking to Jelani in the background and building a relationship with him. And then after the Venezuelan thing happened, we discovered that they'd been talking to the vice president already through her
yeah,
brother or
yeah,
through a
yeah.
proxy. So that already kind of set up relationships of some kind in the background that would, to some extent, represent their interest or stabilize the situation, or so they kind of figured out how to not have a vacuum and how
Hmm.
to have somebody that would be at least more compliant. And it's possible that the same is happening in Iran, but it's not visible to us, and it won't be visible
Absolutely not.
until it
No.
happens, because you just don't know it. It's all intelligence. It's all in the background. It only becomes public after the event. So it's possible that something like that could play out in Iran. I think probably less likely, because it's a very different kind of country. But we simply don't know, and it only becomes apparent
There's
when it happens.
there's a lot of speculation that a lot of people say this is too easy. It's all choreographed. It's all pre-planned. Some of that happens, but I think it seems like what the U.S. is trying to do generally is to stop all these sanctions. And so it seems like the operation with Venezuela was, to give an excuse to lift the sanctions. And it seems like with Iran, they would like to get that oil on the market, and to be able to lift the sanctions. But they need some kind of like display of submission by Iran, something to allow that to happen, like a change of leadership, and get the moderate mullah in, even if they don't totally control them, because the jury's really still out on Venezuela, how much control they really have over that regime there. So yes, we'll see. But it's a good point. Like you said, it's not necessarily. Trump waited a long time on Venezuela, and so there's a lot going on behind the scenes. But to me, Trump's not a gambler, and he's not a competitor. He likes to have everything tied up basically beforehand, negotiated, pre-negotiated. A little spectacle happens, and then we're done, and he declares victory. That's his MO basically up till now. And so be very surprised, given all the tensions and all the problems he has, that he doesn't follow that script here as well.
Okay, feels like a good point to wrap up at. Don't know if you have any final thoughts.
No, I think
Nothing
that's it.
really. Okay, to the listeners who've got this far, thank you very much for listening to the podcast, and let us know what you think of it, and if you'd like more of the same, but perhaps on different or related topics, or on the same topic as things develop in time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.